I think that the main question is, what sort of war are we fighting? And the answer is that we're fighting a world war. We know this not by what we say, but by what the other side says. When you ask, when Osama bin Laden speaks, when Khalid Mashal, the head of Hamas, speaks, when Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, president of Iran, speaks, and so on and so forth, they all say that this is a war for global domination in the name of Islam, whether Shiite Islam or Sunni Islam. And we like to think of the war as just being something that we create. We react to attacks against us, and therefore if we're fighting somewhere, it's our war that we've decided to fight. But in fact, we didn't start this war. This is a war that was fought, it's fought on throughout the world, and Israel is the central front in this war for the people who are fighting against the United States, whether it's in New York or in Baghdad, whether it's in Dallas, where you have cells of Islamists who have been arrested, or whether it's in Algeria, when you have people blowing up hotels. For all of the people who are involved in this, they see Israel as a central front in this jihad, because Israel is the only non-Islamic enclave from the Mediterranean Sea to the Indus, so that for them, Israel is a blight on what would otherwise be an absolutely clean stream of only Islamic countries. And that for them is something unacceptable. Osama bin Laden refers to Israel as the Jewish statelet, and that has to be eradicated. So does Mahmoud Ahmadinejad in Iran. So does Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority. And when we look at all of what they're saying, and also how they're teaching their children, and what the suicide bombers, whether they're blowing up trains in London, trains in Madrid, or buses in Tel Aviv are saying, they are all saying that this war starts with the Jews, but it doesn't end there, because they believe that once they get rid of Israel, the road will be clear to destroy the rest of the Western world. And so people like to think about the war against Israel as somehow different because Israelis are Jews, or because they'd like to think that there's some sort of nationalist struggle between the Jews and the Palestinians. But in fact, when we see what the Palestinians are saying and doing, they're saying very clearly they don't want a state. What they want to do is destroy the Jewish state. They don't want to destroy the Jewish state in the name of Palestinian nationalism, but rather, as the charter of Hamas says, they want to destroy the Jewish state in order to build an Islamic caliphate in the land of Israel that will eventually become part of the global caliphate, which is what they and their counterparts in Al-Qaeda want.
What do you think about the Pentagon, for instance, and the defense, Deputy Defense Secretary
England
throwing out the single best source for the ideological connection to the war?
I think it's very disturbing that after September 11th, the United States decided to refer to this war as a war against terrorism. Because what the 19 hijackers on September 11th were saying was that they weren't fighting for terrorism, they were fighting for Islam. They saw themselves, and millions of others also saw them, as pious Muslims who were sacrificing themselves for the glory of Allah. And yet, immediately after the September 11th attacks, a decision was clearly made at the top levels of government to ignore the fact that this was an act of war committed against the United States of America as the head of the free world, as the head of the non-Islamic world, in the name of Allah. And we see from the FBI to the Pentagon and throughout an incredible reluctance to pay attention to the doctrine of the enemy. And the doctrine of the enemy is in the Quran, which they cite chapter and verse of daily in all of their fatwas, calling for the murder of Americans and Israelis and French and Algerians and Egyptians and whomever doesn't see the world the way that they do. And the United States made a decision, no, we don't want to look at this doctrine. And as a result, you had crazy situations where even in that extraordinary display of patriotism at the National Cathedral in the wake of the September 11th attacks, they invited Muzamil Siddiqui to be the Islamic representative at this ecumenical prayer service. And he has spoken out in favor of jihad and the destruction of Israel and in praise of Hamas and Hezbollah. And so the United States simply refused to acknowledge the nature of the enemy, and for a number of reasons, but it did. And that's the source of the firing of Major Coughlin in the Pentagon, that he was pointing out the doctrine of the enemy, and there are people very high up in the Pentagon who don't want to hear about it.
What do you think the fate of Israel vis-a-vis a Palestinian state, the establishment of a Palestinian state, or a Palestinian victory, if you will, what do you think that signifies to the global jihad?
It would be the greatest victory they have had ever, because it would signify that they were on the march. It would signify to them that they had destroyed the Jews. They're deeply anti-Semitic, and they believe that Jews control the world. And so their victory against Israel, the wiping Israel off the map, as Ahmadinejad puts it, would be an enormous victory. It would tell them that they are on the road to victory, and they would be able to mobilize millions and millions of jihadists throughout the world, in the West as well as throughout the Muslim world, to continue the fight on.
But wouldn't they be satisfied with a Palestinian state and half of Jerusalem and the U.S. moving out of Iraq? Wouldn't they be satisfied?
Well, you know, the supposedly moderate Palestinians in Fatah that are represented by Palestinian Authority Chairman Mahmoud Abbas make quite clear that the maximum offer that Israel can give them, which included all of Judea and Samaria and Jerusalem, would not satisfy them. They say it absolutely clearly, because they also want millions of foreign-born Arabs to freely immigrate into Israel and overwhelm the Jewish state. They want to make sure that that Israel has no right to defend itself from foreign attack through Judea and Samaria, and Israel has 1 million Muslim citizens who are already saying that they also consider themselves Palestinians, and they will be incited, as they have been in the past, by the new state of Palestine to demand autonomy inside of Israel in order to undermine the very existence of the Jewish state. And that is clear. These are things that they say on a daily basis. Mahmoud Abbas, who's supposed to be the moderate, states openly that he doesn't recognize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state, which means he doesn't accept Israel, because Israel is a Jewish state. So, no, they wouldn't be satisfied, and they would demand more.
And on what levels of the U.S. administration or Washington, what levels is this understood? Is it understood in the State Department?
I think it's denied in the State Department. I think that there's been an enormous effort over the past several generations to reject the notion that Israel is an ally of the United States, that Israel's strategic successes and safety adhere and advance America's national security interests. And a lot of this has to do with Arab oil and the fear that embracing Israel would alienate the Arabs and raise oil prices. But what's interesting is that every time that the Americans move farther away from Israel, as they're doing at present, the Arab world sees that as an indication of American weakness and lack of resolve. And a reason not to trust the Americans, to protect them against common threats. For instance, the Saudi Arabians are now absolutely certain that the Americans won't defend them against Iran, and so they're making deals with Iran, and they refuse to lower the price of oil by increasing supply, in spite of the beseechment and begging of President Bush in his visit to Saudi Arabia. So I think that they've got it all wrong. They're trying to be so smart that they're too clever by half. They think that by being bad to Israel, they will appease the Arabs, but in fact what they show is that America isn't a credible ally. And again, this has to do with the fact that the Arab world perceives the United States and Israel as very close, as two sides of the same coin. Hence, the United States is the great Satan and Israel is the little Satan. And when the United States turns its back on Israel, it doesn't redound to popularity of America in the Arab world, but rather to contempt towards America on the part of the Arab world, because they say that the Americans are weak and not resolute, and therefore they are not a force to be reckoned with.